You know, it's about time. I'm a YouTube music reviewer. I gotta rank some albums of my favorite artists. And why not start with the heart-throttling sound, the blood-pumping action of soft jazz rock? Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and it's time to rank the albums of the classic of classic rock bands, Steely Dan. If you don't like Steely Dan, then I don't know what to do for you. It's actually fine, but you should. They wrote some huge hits, they sold millions of albums, they were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, about which Donald Fagen said he had tremendous indifference. And that pretty much says it all. You know, they've got an unmatched sardonic wit as a band. You know, laced in their music are all these seedy characters and sketches of their, troubled lives. Everything's kind of got a detachment and a supreme intelligence which rises to the level of bizarre and strange, to the point where it's hard to believe they were this popular. Steely Dan is, of course, the dynamic duo of Donald Fagen on piano and lead vocals, and then Walter Becker, who sadly passed away a few years ago, on lead guitar. They incorporate classic elements of soul and rock and roll with cool jazz and bebop and other forms of jazz music for the super pristine production, some of the best recordings and produced albums of all time. They have 9 studio albums total, and my last place one is pretty obvious. I imagine most lists have this near the bottom, and it's their most recent from 2003 called Everything Must Go. And don't get it twisted, this is a really stellar late career album, as late career albums go, but something about it feels more sterilized than the typically sharp and acerbic material from Prime Dan. Some of the chord progressions and overall songs feel like a pastiche of their past material, but it is saying something that the last ranked album on this list is still one I enjoy immensely.
She's almost gothic and I like it like that.
Next up is the comeback album, 20 years after 1980's GAUCHO, and they hardly skipped a beat. With this huge cast of studio musicians and a very full production, everything brimming with life. Most old man classic rock albums have a very old man kind of sound, let's be real. But Donald Fagen's voice sounds almost no different. I mean, the complexity, the snark is here again. Almost Gothic is a definite highlight for me, especially texturally with the Fender Rhodes and the Wurlitzer kind of going back and forth. It's got clarinet and saxophone and a trumpet solo and acoustic and electric guitars and those very crystalline, pure female backing vocals. And this is a theme with Steely Dan, so many instruments, but every single one can be picked clearly out of the mix. There's nothing muddy about it. Cousin Dupree is one of their simplest, but I think most effective character studies with just a really clever vocal performance from Donald. The title track is amazing, and the 7-minute closer, West of Hollywood, is probably one of their most ambitious, one of their proggiest. That sax solo at the end. This album actually beat out Eminem and Radiohead's Kid A at the 2000 Grammys for Album of the Year. This album was so irrelevant at that time. It's just music completely out of its time, with no relation to the mainstream whatsoever, and yet it wins. That's just gold. It also marks a classic moment where Walter Becker tried to shake Stevie Wonder's hand.
Why is he standing in your spangled leather poncho?
Number 7 of 9 on my list is, and we're just going chronologically back in time here, it's GAUCHO, the last of their historic run in the 70s. GAUCHO is the sleaziest, it's the yachtiest of yacht rock albums that the boys ever achieved. Apparently they obsessed over songs like Hey 19 in an unprecedented way. They assembled the drums on GAUCHO out of 46 takes from different drummers. Like, they had multiple drummers practice from noon to 6 every day, and they didn't even start recording until after dinner. And because they couldn't get the exact drum sound they were looking for. They had engineer Roger Nichols make an early drum machine for $150,000. Compared to their other albums, the songs are much more spacious. They're much more about, kind of setting an atmosphere and a mood. My two favorites are definitely Glamour Profession and Gaucho. But for people who especially hate that yacht rock sound, that pristine dorkiness of those synths, then this is not the place to start. And they do sound a little more in love with themselves on this album, which I think it suffers a little bit because of that. You hear like the tension of those recording sessions in there somewhere, but it's still quintessentially Steely Dan. Next up is probably my most controversial pick, maybe their purest rock and roll album. It's their second album from 1973. And I'm never going back to my old school. You heard how I love Two Against Nature and Gaucho, so obviously I love this album. But half the record is pretty straight-laced rock and roll and rockabilly and blues. Classics like Bodhisattva and Showbiz Kids, undeniable songs really, but just never been my ideal sound from the band. Razor Boy is a huge highlight for me. This is really the start of their character sketches of some of the nastiest scoundrels of urban life. They describe this highfalutin lifestyle, this successful hip guy who seems to have it all. And the Razor Boy seems to represent this unexpected, stark reality that comes in and flips that success on its head. It might even be a play on the Grim Reaper or death itself, the scythe, the Razor Boy. Boston Rag is another huge highlight with that lethargic kind of mid-tempo intro, just a great intro. I love the acoustic guitar use on this song that gives way to that very simple but memorable lead electric line. Again, fantastic album. I wouldn't fault anyone who puts this at number 1. Number 6 is another early album. Some might say the earliest.
Talking about a world where all is free. It just could.
Compared to later albums, this is pretty simple chordally. There's some modulation, there's some odd chords here and there, but it's playable by the average Joe. It's classic rock in the truest sense. They came out of the gates swinging with Do It Again, and despite his hesitance to be a lead singer at the time, this song really solidified Donald Fagen as the personality that would drive the band to such great heights. Sounded like he was 24 years old going on 55 right from the get-go. A Latin vamp tune with a sitar solo. These were pop songs, but weird. I actually really like David Palmer's voice on Dirty Work or Brooklyn Knows the Charmer Under Me. He's got kind of this blue-eyed soul thing that worked really well with the melancholic jazz rock. I don't think he's missed on future records, but he sounds great. Although I prefer the musical complexity of future albums, I think the DNA of the sound is here. It's just not fully realized yet. It shows a young band overflowing with melodic and harmonic ideas, which I think is ultimately why they appeal to so many people, millions across the world. This is the point where this ranking just gets impossible. But I gotta press on, and regrettably put the perfect album at number 5, KATY Lied.
Katie lies. You can see it in her eyes.
And once again, I prefer the jazzier numbers here over the rambling rock and roll and blues. So, Daddy Don't Live in That New York City No More or Black Friday. These songs just really aren't my cup of tea. Chain Lightning is also just a little bit formulaic for me. I think it reminds me of this vocal jazz song by the Manhattan Transfer that I did in high school. I guess that association with the sweaty tux isn't the best thing. Yet, I think I'd have a couple top 10 Steely Dan songs from this album, so it's a bit of a hit or miss experience for me. Bad Sneakers, for example, just the catchiest chorus ever. And Rose Darling is the best example of very wholesome instrumentals mixed with seedy lyricism. You get this evocative Christian symbolism in the song, and again, one of the best choruses I think they ever did. I think Michael McDonald is just in his element here doing backing vocals. Lots of money in the bank, although I could be wrong. Not sure why I love that part so much, but then there's Dr. Wu, which is a predecessor to those very unique chord clusters and chord voicings of the album Asia. It's just a brilliant track with such a melancholic feel and amazing harmonies and modulations in the chorus, just one of their best. Seemingly about a drug dealer who fails to come through. I think KATY, I'm not sure if it's a girl or a drug, who knows and who cares.
I live night by night.
Pretzel Logic is at this point the band's best album cover because the first two stink. Also the coolest album name, and just a really classic album formula here, with 4 just absolute belters to start off the album. Ricky Don't Lose That Number is a huge hit for the band. It has that brilliant contrast between the sinister bossa nova in the verses and then the rocking choruses and guitar solo. It's a very wholesome sounding album from the band with songs like Berrytown and Any Major Dude, which really just go down easy. I think it's a great album to get someone into the band. But I also love the shorter and darker vignettes on side B, like Charlie Freak or With a Gun, which is such a cool foray into this folk country western style. Then there's the even shorter 90-second Through with Buzz, which just packs so much into that short time. It is one of my favorite Steely Dan tracks, to be honest. I wish they had done more of these dramatic string arrangements. I think it really fits the atmosphere of city life and the street drug drama so well. I absolutely can't get enough of those little verse melodies on this song. It's just a pure dopamine hit every time. If you've watched this far along, then you're probably pretty familiar with the band and you know which albums are coming in at number 2 and number 1. And number 2 is maybe the biggest guitar album the band ever made. It's very dark, it's very gritty, but at the same time it's got these very long grooves and very infectious danceable tracks. From 1976, it's a royal scam. Again, it's just 1 year after the last album, KATY Lied. They're just boom, 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 boom. 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. That's 6 incredible albums, 1 year after the next. I'd say probably rock and roll's best run. Kid Charlemagne is probably the best example of their studio musicianship, their resourcefulness. You got Bernard Purdy's effortless drumming and little ghost notes, Chuck Rainey's very buoyant bass work and some excellent Fender Rhodes and clavinet textures, and of course one of the greatest guitar solos of all time according to Rolling Stone and many others from the great jazz fusion guitarist Larry Carlton. In Steely Dan, there's kind of a theme of them front-loading their albums, and this one, again, side A, is just impeccable, and it's probably what played into them selling so many albums. But this side B is probably my favorite from the band. You got Green Earrings, Haitian Divorce, Everything You Did, The Royal Scam, just those 4 songs. There's so much variety. But number 1, it just had to be this one. This is the audiophile record from the 70s. You go into a stereo store, chances are they've got this album ready to go, ready to hook up, to wow you, to sell you on that big piece of equipment. It's got the wildly sophisticated jazz voicings that they came to be known for, and just, man, what do you say? Yes, it's the force that was 1977's Asia. I mean, I don't really know what to say about this album. I think it's perfect. I think it's one of my favorite albums of all time. Black Cow is my favorite Steely Dan song of all time. Lots of superlatives, greatest, best, favorite. It's the perfect album opener. If I hear that bass line for 2 seconds, I have to listen to the whole thing. I have to do it. It's like the distilled encapsulated version of their New York 70s nightclub sound. It feels weird to like academically describe what this song is about, but it basically describes the relationship between a very conscientious, very stable person and a wild, reckless person. The title track is a tour de force with luscious keys and harmony vocals. It's just got this very shimmering, elegant quality to it. And that evocative middle section, which bounces from these Caribbean marimbas to these, smooth jazz guitar soloing. And just when you think the soloing's done, Wayne Shorter comes in with this woozy tenor sax solo, and you got Steve Gadd just bashing and banging on the drums behind him. That tag section at the end was recorded in 2 takes. So that's pretty special. Then there's the loser anthem, Deacon Blues, which, again, just perfect in every way. Those soulful backing vocals and the chorus and everything about it, the horn arrangements. I haven't even gotten to Peg or Home at Last yet. I don't know what to do. I really don't like the critique that, of course this album is good because they spent $2 million in the studio, they hired the best of the best, they pushed them relentlessly. The fact is they earned that money, from writing amazing music that many, many, many people love and cherish. So why not do it big if you have the vision and the means and the talent? It brought the band to new heights of sleekness and mood and performance and writing. There was just no chance that Asia wasn't number one. And that's it. That's my ranking of the Steely Dan albums. This is an all-time favorite for me, and I hope you're able to dig in as well and share your list in the comments. Let's just hash it out, let's just share the love of Steely Dan down there. And as always, thank you so much for watching.